Today I'm going to take you with me as I rework the classic dragon everyone knows and loves into something more practical, grounded, and realistic for my fantasy setting. Let's jump right into it. Good morning, glad to be back. One of the big pluses about the comment section is that it doubles as a sort of suggestion box for me to mine ideas for new videos out of, which is really great considering I am always running low and always looking for new things to film. It's kind of one of the more difficult parts of the process. And a while back, a particular comment stuck out to me, though at first it was because I saw it and immediately said, yeah, there's no way that's ever gonna happen. This specific comment was a request for me to paint some dragons, which I really didn't want to do for a whole number of reasons. For starters, dragons in their current pop culture form are not only boring, but overexposed. One of the main reasons I paint in the first place is to create things that don't exist, or at least make interesting variations on things that do. Painting dragons seems almost to me like making fan art, which I don't do as a rule. But that comment has stuck in my mind for whatever reason, especially lately as I've been making mythological creatures and legends for some of the cultures in my setting. I can't really deny the historical fact that almost every culture in the world has some kind of dragon to its name. So I got to thinking more about it, and I realized that the word dragon is sort of this huge, vague, taxonomical clade of animals that's really just boiled down to, at the most basic level, just big lizard, and that's all it really needs to be. And that is something I can work with and make my own. So join me for a couple minutes while we sit back, strip back all the layers of dragons, cut things off, add things in, and turn them into something unique that I can be proud of. Let's get right into it. Okay, first things first, let's take our stereotypical dragon and drop some of the more fantastical elements to make something a little more gritty and realistic. First thing on the chopping block, the wings. When you consider that the heaviest flying bird today is about 40 pounds, it makes the idea of a multiple-ton reptile being able to fly just kinda ridiculous. I mean, the herons in my setting are already enough of a problem, and right now the only reason they can fly is because it's cool and I say so. So, no wings. Next is a bit of a minor problem, but still something I think is worth fixing. The legs on most depictions of dragons sit underneath the body, giving them a sort of mammalian body plan. I want to bring this a little closer to your average lizard body plan, and bring those legs out to the sides of the body. What we're left with might at first seem a bit lackluster. We've taken everything away to the point that all we have really is a giant lizard. But now we arrive at the fun part of the process, adding things back on. There's a lot of variations and subspecies we could make for each of the environments, but for the sake of time, let's just do one for each to act as the archetypal predator for each region. For starters, we'll pin down our average size, let's say some 40 feet for males and 45 for females, although nearly half of that is just tail, but more on that in a bit. Since this is a jungle animal, I want to take some inspiration from Amazonian rainbow boas. Not for the rainbow pattern itself, but for the smooth, reflective skin of reptiles living in wet, tropical environments. To use a more lizard-esque base, we'll also take some inspiration from skinks as well. One of the dragon-like traits I intend to keep is the long, articulated neck, because why not? Looks great. To give our dragon a bit of flair, I'm also going to give it a prehensile tail. When I came up with this idea, I was kind of stumped for a minute on what advantage that might actually give, which is how I arrived at the idea of an arboreal predator that uses bait to hunt. Let me explain. A 40-foot-long, couple-ton animal needs a lot of food, or at very least a single huge meal every few weeks or so. Smaller variants of our jungle dragons, or juveniles of the species we're working on now, can easily get by raiding the nests of our herons for eggs, or hatchlings, but this becomes inefficient as they mature, which is around the time they begin actively hunting. To do this, our dragons catch and kill a smaller animal before dragging it off to a well-trod game trail, which are in turn frequented by larger scavenging animals. From here, our dragon climbs a tree, and using chromatophores in its skin, camouflages itself against the bark like a chameleon. When a large enough animal arrives to scavenge the carcass, our dragon will lash out with its venomous tail barb, pull in its prey, and constrict until dead. Although I hate the way dragons are utilized in a lot of pop culture, I do want to find ways to create more grounded, believable versions of classic dragon traits. And although I hate the fact that these giant lizards are somehow able to fly, and I think the whole fire-breathing thing is kinda stupid, for some reason I really love the idea of a dragon that can talk, which is kinda counterintuitive because it's kinda the most bizarre and unrealistic part of any classic dragon lore. That being said, the Hobbit movies came out while I was growing up, and I absolutely loved Smaug then and still do to this day, and about 75% of that has to do with the amazing execution of his voice. Now, this may sound like an incredibly difficult thing to incorporate naturally, but I think I've found a pretty clever way around it, by making the venom of the tail barb also act as a wildly potent hallucinogen, leading to people who get stung and live to tell about it spread stories about the giant creature in the jungle that talks like a demon and devours those who hunt it. If you've read Lord of the Flies, consider the way Simon hallucinates the pighead talking to him, because that is a lot like how I imagine it. This creature may not look or act much like any conventional dragon, but that's really kind of the point. The reason I call this setting, this story, a fantasy project is because that's the closest descriptor I have for it, but there's so much more to explore in these genres than most people imagine. The reason Lord of the Rings, for example, works so well is because the fantastical elements are bound to a deep, rich history that's cohesive and spans thousands of years, which makes the world feel real and alive. I'm doing the same, only my anchor to reality is anthropology and biology. I'm rambling a bit, but I guess what I'm trying to say is that though it might not be much of a dragon, it's exactly what it needs to be. When I started figuring out how this dragon would come together, I realized there was a bit of a method for making these. First thing to consider is what food sources might be available, and since this one lives in a desert, the answer to that is not much. But because of that lack of readily available food, we have an idea of how big these guys are going to be, which again is not as much as the other ones, with about 20 feet long for females and 25 for males. As a piece of base inspiration, we'll take the general build and shape of monitor lizards and throw in a splash of bearded dragon and armadillo lizard to get some of that prickly desert texture. Because of the lack of the food in their environment, this species is both fiercely territorial and cannibalistic. Because these are both based on real-world monitor lizards, as well as having in-baked aggression being a central facet of the species, let's have a rutting season where males fight each other for mates. In the real world, monitor lizards do a bit of wrestling match for mating rights, but because this is my world and I can do what I want, our gauntlet for these guys will be a straight-up fight to the death, where the loser gets eaten. But how exactly do they kill each other? Well, with a set of lovely lizard tusks, of course, because when I said rut earlier, I meant it very, very literally. And beyond that, you can never have enough precious materials like ivory in a setting and story about people discovering and trying to exploit a new land. I mean, the literal shorthand name for our archipelago setting is the Ivory Isles. As we did the hallucination thing for our other dragon to give the effect of speech, I wanted to give these guys something distinctly dragon-like to keep them from getting completely removed from the core of today's prompt. For these guys, I had the idea of giving them hordes, because what's more classically dragon than a horde? But instead of gold or treasure, these creatures are going to hoard bones. Why, you might ask? Calcium. Let me explain. In the real world, there are birds that eat almost exclusively bone, and many more animals capable of digesting it. These dragons are one of those animals, but it's not the adults that are eating these bones, but mothers and hatchlings. In the desert, other members of this species are the biggest threats to a clutch, so by hoarding bones to consume before laying eggs, the excess calcium makes shells stronger. When the eggs hatch, the babies then eat the remainder of the horde, quickening the development of strong bones and especially tusks, which are extremely important down the road. And because I plan to have a Bedouin-type desert culture living alongside these guys, as well as the fact I can't help myself, I decided to paint a couple weapons made from different components of our dragon, one made of the claw and a sort of sword carved from a single tusk, which of course is a huge status symbol for anyone who owns one for all of the obvious reasons. To get one, you have to kill a 25-foot hyper-aggressive apex predator, which is probably pretty important in a super low-tech, pre-metallurgy society, but we're kind of getting into the weeds a bit here, so I won't delve into that any further. I considered spending the very last part of this video just adding some more little details and extra little fun stuff and all the space in between, but I think it would have been a bit too crowded. What we have right now is, in my opinion, just about as good as these pages are going to get. I have really loved doing this project. It's been a ton of fun, and I think that the final results really speak for themselves. Well, I am pleased to say I have done what I thought was impossible for a very, very long time. Make dragons cool, unique, and interesting. To me at least, I'm well aware of why people like the conventional dragon. Same reason why people watch Transformers and Godzilla movies. They're loud, flashy, and attention-grabbing. And in the same way my dragons are barely dragons, normal dragons are barely animals. They're fantasy creatures. They're awe-inspiring, grandiose, and utterly unrealistic. And sometimes that's exactly what you want. But for me at least, it's not even close. So I remade them on a whim, and I dearly hope you enjoyed coming along for the ride. If you want to support the channel, please leave a comment and tell me what you want to see next. And consider subscribing. It costs nothing, and it really, really helps me out. Thank you so much for watching, and until next time, go make something. I mean, just what's stopping you? Like really, genuinely, what is stopping you? Have a lovely evening, everyone.